I too have a gift card, except it's $10. So it's not about that. So I feel that this is a pretty self-sustaining unit of individuals. So the way that we're going to do this is a little bit different. This box is going to be passed around to anybody who answers or replies or has an idea or has any way of building on the content that I present. Okay? These things over here, take as many as you feel are necessary to express how much you're going to participate, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to trust the group that, if somebody participates, that box will be passed on. First of all. Second of all, that nobody will slip theirs in, etc., etc. So if you can, just take those papers over there, write your name on a few of them, take a couple of them, and then as we go through the presentation, whenever somebody participates in any way, just pass the box on and the person throws the paper in. And then at the very end, Professor Thomas Teo will pick a winner. Cool? Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions? Thank you. I'll be here until 20 minutes from now. Okay, so. Right? Yeah. So to begin, okay, so here's the thing. Since we're doing a presentation on leadership, there's going to be some overlap. However, there's a great deal of difference between the presentations that I have and Shoaib has, right? Not Shabbat. So on the one question is, what is leadership? Okay? And the other one is, what is a successful leader? What constitutes a successful leader? All right. What is leadership? Great beginning to the presentation. What do you feel or think or assume leadership is? Having gone through the presentation, having seen what we're doing.
I'd answer, but that very cheating.
No? Please.
Should I? Well, essentially, a person who takes on the role of trying to influence others and motivate them towards like a specific goal or purpose.
Okay. Wait, you had
Yeah, I was just going to say somebody who takes on an assertive role.
assertive role?
Yeah.
Travel?
Someone who has authority.
Authority?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Any ideas? I like how this was happening now. Okay. Anybody else? Cool. Okay. What constitutes a successful leader? If you saw somebody and you were like, damn, that is a successful leader. That is the leader of all leaders. What is that person like?
Charismatic.
Charismatic?
Understanding.
Understanding? Yeah?
Me? Oh, motivational.
Motivational? Independent and
Problem solver.
problem solver? And one last one. Yourself.
A little bit more long-winded, but I think a successful leader should have the ability to harness all like the talents and the potentials of the people in their group to put forward to achieve the common goal of the group.
Cool. Let's make up two words to express that.
To harness the potential.
Potential harnesser.
Sure. Turn that into a tree.
Right. Potential oriented. Can we phrase it that way?
Sure.
Yeah. All right. So, critical leadership. Let me just tell Google that I'm okay with what it's doing. Okay. So, what we're going to do is, throughout the presentation, we're going to cover these ideas, and we'll see how to compare and contrast what was presented in the previous presentation with the ideas that we have in this one. So start off, I'll start off with a quote. Leadership is not about titles, it's not about positions or flowcharts. It is about one life influencing another. By John Maxwell. We'll begin with industrial leadership. Industrial leadership is what John Ross has suggested as the view of leadership from ancient Egypt times to about the 1980s. It's expressed through different various theories, and I'm going to actually touch upon something that you asked, Pablo. So in the early 20th century, there was the great man theory of leadership, where it was great men, mainly men, that were considered to be leaders. Like Adolf Hitler would probably fit the criteria. Barack Obama would probably fit the criteria. And many others. Nelson Mandela definitely would fit the criteria. Next, in the 1930s, a bunch of social scientists kind of got together and saw that democratic leadership leads to good results, so they espoused the democratic leadership view. So the leader is somebody who creates an environment where a democratic way of interacting would be characteristic of a leader. Okay. Next is the trait leadership model, where they try to figure out what traits constitutes what it means to be a successful leader, right? Next, in the 1960s, behavior as leadership. What particular behaviors must the leader enact in order to be that successful leader, right? So you can see how this is a bit contextual, because the 1950s and 60s were all about behaviorism, where if you as a social scientist didn't accept behaviorism and include it in your model, you'd probably be kind of pushed away from, to the sides. So behaviorism kind of entered its way into leadership as well. In the 1970s, it was about a situational leadership. So what kind of situations exist, and how should you act as a leader in those situations to be a successful one, okay? And in the 1980s, the excellence theory of leadership came about, which was sort of like, who's a great CEO? Let's figure out why. Let's break that person's traits up into little bits and try to apply it to other people, which, interestingly enough, is kind of resemblant of the great man theory. So we're kind of taking a step back in that regard, okay? So let me ask you this question. What do you think is characteristic of all these sort of views on leadership? And Pavel, I'm kind of giving you the ropes here. What is representative of all of these? How are they all in common? You'll still get a thing in the box, so it's okay.
I feel like it's all about what kind of personality people have, or what certain characteristics are important.
Oh yeah, that's one. Anybody else? Okay. You're pretty much correct, right? So it's about the following things. It's about leadership as a position. So, for example, I'm a student success team leader in health aid, right? So I'm considered to be a leader because I have that title, okay? Next, it's about leadership as management. So if you as the CEO of Coca-Cola can increase profits by 5% in the next 3 years, we're going to consider you to be a great leader because you're doing things right. But that's management. Management and leadership are different things, okay? Leadership as a paradigm. So what that means to say is, if you're a leader, then that's sort of it. You kind of you're boxed in as being a leader. It's not about flow, it's not about process, it's not about movement, okay? It's hierarchical. So the idea of organizations like financial organizations, like, actually financial organizations are very resemblant of that, where it's hierarchy, right? You have your manager, your senior manager, you have your chief executive officer who's above everybody else, and it kind of all trickles down to the working man, okay? And it's individualistic. In what regard? Well, Barack Obama as a leader is a leader, and whatever he does is whatever he does. So it's very, interestingly enough, it's very resemblant of what we're confronting in critical psychology, and I'll touch upon that a little bit later on. So in terms of ethics, this industrial perspective is utilitarian, it's short-term, and it's materialistic. in terms of the background assumptions. It's rationalistic, it's quantitative, it's scientifically reductionistic, and it's linear. Okay, sound familiar? Ish? Okay. Let's take a look at a case study. Is anybody familiar with Taylor, Frederick Taylor, Taylorism? So we're in psychology, not a management science, so I'm not judging you. But he is considered to be the godfather of scientific management in the late 19th century, early 20th century. So he essentially espoused the idea that you take all the responsibility away from the working man, you give it to the manager. The manager does the thinking, the working man does the labor, okay? So what he wanted was organizational efficiency. What he wanted was focusing on the scientific method in improving organizations so that you pay the least amount of money to create the most amount of results. Now, this went as far as measuring different consistency of gravel, the type of shovel used, the distance that you need to throw the gravel, what the average rate of throwing was, the sort of height. Like what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pass around this book, which is his book, Principles of Scientific Management, and just look through these two highlighted pages, where you'll see literal measurements that are done of workers. Have a look through that. Sorry. So, if the worker did not perform as suggested, alternatives were proposed, or the worker was fired. Okay? Now, by the end of his career, a York University research and scholar, Gareth Morgan Taylor, he said Taylor, by his death in 1915, was considered the enemy of the working man, and we'll work on why. He suggested that Taylor created the McDonaldization of organizations, where it was about McJobs, it was about ruthless efficiency, it was about predictability, control, and de-skilled jobs. So, why do you think he said that? Why do you think a man who espoused the hyper-efficient scientifically methodological perspective of organizations and leadership, why is he the enemy of the working man? Yeah.
I would say because he's treating the working man as cattle. Someone who just basically is the one getting whipped and is plowing the field and they're just doing all the manual work. While the person is sitting in the car and they're the one whipping, telling them what to do and how to do it, and they're the ones who are thinking of everything. Whereas the working man is just following orders. They're not leaders themselves.
Thank you. Yeah, that was everything I wanted to say. Yeah.
Well, basically what she said, I mean, having been sort of in the lowest rungs of an organizational flowchart, like, it's pretty spirit crushing. Like, you have no agency, your opinion is not valued. You can see why this sort of movement towards, like you were talking about, the management making all the decisions is demoralizing for people who are in the working class or executing those labor jobs.
Remember, it's about pass the box around to people that present.
I also say that Marx was the one who was saying how difficult it can be to remove workers from the overall work process and just involve them in one component.
Well,
And involve them from relationships. Like,
here we go, right?
he did pretty much everything that's
That-
going against that
There we
idea.
go. There we go. So thank you for your ideas. So, to summarize the industrial view, it's masculine, it's linear, it's reductionistic, it's about control, it's about predictability, it's about traits. And next we move on to the post-industrial view of leadership. So the post-industrial view of leadership encompasses the ideas of relationality, ethics, social justice, culture, society, agents of change, agency, empowerment. Now, it's not like the 1980s came about and all of a sudden people were like, well, leadership is something other than what we've thought for the past 3,000 years. In fact, Stogdill and Bass, who you mentioned, Stogdill and Bass in their gigantic book of leadership say that these ideas were proposed in as early as 1936 However, it took some time socially to get there to understand that. Now, nothing stands in isolation either. This sort of perspective, this post-industrial push, was a reaction against the old way of thinking. It was against accepting dogma, and once more, I'm going to reiterate that perhaps this sounds a little bit similar and familiar to what we do here in critical psychology. Some other ways of perceiving the post-industrial view are the idea that the quality of leadership is dependent on the quality of relationships that the leader espouses. It's leadership as social change. It's leadership as benefiting society. It's leadership for the capacity of creating other leaders. It's leadership as a question of social justice. And it's leadership as a process. So it's not a paradigm. It's not you're a leader, you get a check mark. It's a constant, ongoing process of, we'll see. Okay. Let's take a look at a case study, the social change model of leadership. Okay. So the social change model of leadership is entirely resemblant of the post-industrial view of leadership. In what regard? Well, you can see the common themes. Engagement in the modal and end values. So it's not just about how what you end up doing, it's how you end up doing it. It's not the end result, it's the path as well. It's about leaders as responsibility, leaders as being responsible for the people that they're with and responsible for themselves. It's about leadership as social change. It's about process and movement, wherein you're not statically a leader. What leadership means is moving forward, is moving to the sides, it's embracing change. It's the acknowledgement of differences, and we'll see a little bit later on how that plays out. And it's focusing, and this is something that's big for me, it's focusing on empowerment and it's focusing on collective action. So, what are the two goals of the social change leadership model? One is to develop self-knowledge. So those that go through the educational sort of process of learning this model have the following in mind. They must develop self-knowledge, and they must also develop leadership competence. Next, and this is a very important key point that's relevant to critical psychology, they must create positive social change in the leader's institution, so immediate environment, and or society. The leadership model, the social change leadership model, has three perspectives, three sort of ways of looking at things. Message is the group, is the individual, and it's society. In other words, it's encompassing of the socio-historical perspectives that we touched upon earlier in this course. It's not about traits. It's not about the good apple, bad apple. It's about what happens as a whole, okay? More importantly, though, it's about fostering values that support the process of social change, okay? So, the 7C value framework. It just so happens that in the English language, the 7 values that they proposed, the people that created this model, all happen to start with C's, which is convenient. So, on the individual level, the values that are idealized are consciousness of self. So the leader must develop self-awareness, must take time to become introspective, to meditate, perhaps, to ask others what they think of him or her, so that he or she can learn his or her flaws, acknowledge his or her strengths. Okay? It's about congruence, and congruence is being true to your own values, beliefs, attitudes, emotions, and acting consistently with them. And it was Mahatma Gandhi that said that happiness is when what you think, what you say, and what you do are in harmony. And that's reflective of that. And it's about commitments. So passion, energy, purposefulness, involvement. It basically, this value here is the fire that feeds the flame. On a group level, the value of collaboration is not the same thing as competition. It's not the same thing as, how did I phrase it? It's not the same thing as cooperation. Collaboration means active involvement of people that are participating in that social interaction. right? Involving everybody, asking questions. That's collaboration. Collaboration versus competition is a conversation that we often have in sort of leadership discussions. Competition is short-termism. Collaboration is long-termism. Common purpose. So, the value of common purpose is, in the group that you're in, enacting the social change model of leadership, the more, sort of, how do I phrase this? The more you as a group share that common vision, that common purpose, the further you'll go. There's a saying, if you walk alone, you'll go fast. If you walk together, you'll go far. And that's resemblant of that as well. Next is controversy with civility. So we have lots of different opinions here about leadership that we actually saw just in the last presentation, right? Next, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with the fact that everybody's going to have a different idea? Everybody's going to come into a project and want to implement it differently. Well, the way that you tackle it from the perspective of the 7C value framework would be to use civil discourse. To use civil discourse, non-confrontation. It's about embracing, and this is key, embracing the idea that different values and different ideas and different perspectives exist. And lastly, to sort of tie everything up is the question of citizenship, which essentially means when one is connected to one's community and society, and when one embraces or enacts social change through social justice, or through community involvement. And this really is the bigger picture. And underlying all of these values is the question of change. If you as a leader do not conduct change, you are not a leader. No matter how charismatic you are, no matter how brave you are, if you're not doing good for the society, you're not a leader. So how is this connected to our course? Which I find to be a really relevant question. So based on last week's reading, according to Sloan, doing theory means exposing and being suspicious of the assumptions that fuel a theory, especially those that reflect the social processes that foster oppression and exclusion. 1. It means questioning movement that rips people apart from their life context to explain behavior in terms of sort of situational factors. It means questioning what's been left out of concepts in order to explain certain phenomena. So I find these guidelines so in tune with what the social change model of leadership proposed that I simply could not avoid doing this presentation and sharing with you the sort of multidisciplinary aspect of critical inquiry. So in terms of oppression or exclusion, that's what the social change model tries to shun. It's about getting people together, sharing a common purpose, and moving forward in terms of social justice. Ripping people apart from their life context, the social change model is about empowerment. It's about giving everybody the right and the opportunity to do great things. It's about questioning what's been left out of concepts. And if we sort of take a step back, the industrial perspective of leadership is the perfect example of leaving ideas out of explanations, where the industrial view on leadership is the natural scientific corollary to psychology. Does that more or less make sense? Hopefully. I'll explain it later on if you have questions. So lastly, I just want to pass around this book as well, where you see I actually forgot what these are called. What are these called? Post-its. So where the post-it is, you'll see the 7 values and sort of gloss through them if you wish. So lastly, Sloan said that doing theory critically means questioning the social effects of the theory itself. The social change leadership model assumes that we are all strong, we're powerful, we have the capacity of creating positive and lasting social change, and that above all else, and above everything else, as an a priori measure for myself and for what this model espouses, is a definition of a socially just idea. And so that is why I consider the social change leadership model to be exemplary of the critical psychology tradition, and hence I have titled this presentation Critical Leadership. To conclude, with a little bit of cheese, we are all leaders, we are all capable of doing great things, and we are all the difference that makes a difference. So, leadership involves you in every way. It involves you being active, it involves you being engaged. You are a leader in your family, you are a leader with your friends, you are a leader in this classroom, you are a leader with walking down the street and seeing things happen. And with that in mind, perhaps the behavior will change, and perhaps we can strive towards a better common purpose. And to add a little bit more cheese, why the dandelion in the background? Well, every seed the wind blows is a form of change, right? So every person who is empowered through the understanding of the social change leadership model is a sprouting of social justice. It's potential, it's growth. So it's simply a metaphor of what I hope can be, and I hope I have motivated you to be your best. Thank you. Yay. Anybody have any questions? You actually get to put your name in if you have a question.
Does social change leadership apply to all contexts? Can you be a social change leader, let's say, if you're a manager at McDonald's?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You cannot, so the social change leadership model is interesting in the regards that you cannot ever remove yourself from the question of social justice. Okay? Now here's one thing that I'm going to mention that wasn't in the presentation. The social change leadership model was created for college students. Okay? If I never told you that, right? Would you have thought that that was a model created for college students? Or do you think it applies to everybody? It's sort of like a yes or no question. Do you think the social change leadership model could be applicable for everybody? I see heads nodding. If you raise your hand and say yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Is there a particular reason why? Yeah.
I don't think there's like a cap or like an age group where like you define where a leader can be or what they can conduct. Essentially anyone can be a leader, like we said, right?
Mm-hmm.
So an age group would essentially make a difference.
I like
So
that.
it shouldn't just focus on college people because everyone can essentially be a leader.
Okay, thank you. Now, if we sort of take a look back at what we said, leadership as the role of influence and the role of motivation, and the role of having a purpose. Does that apply to the social change model? Having a role, having a position, is that what it's about? Yes or no? I think it's not. I think leadership is more of a movement. It's not about having that position. So, yeah.
I just have one question. Don't you, when you really follow like the social change leadership model and you're engaged in it, don't you stop being a leader at some point?
When you get far enough into down the rabbit hole, from my opinion, yeah, it's not about that anymore. And it's not about asking what a leader is. You just live that life. Right? It's not about attributing certain ways of looking at things. It's, I'm doing this because I need to, because I must.
What was the question?
That if you don't, like if you stop being a leader when you're really ingrained in the social change leadership model.
Yeah.
Would you ever stop being a leader?
Well, yeah, if it's all about collective action and doing good for the community and
Well,
everyone
well, if
working
you look at
together.
Nelson Mandela, didn't we always look at him as a leader, some form of leader?
Did he reach his goal yet?
But essentially, he well, now he passed away. But
I think that exemplifies the idea of leadership as a process. It's not like, hey, you do this thing and that's it, you get a check mark. It's about continuously, through your life, enacting social justice. That's the theme that I feel is happening here. Is leadership about having an assertive role, according to that model? Yes, no? No? Clayton says no? I agree with Clayton. Is leadership about having authority?
No.
I agree. It's not. Okay, so here, isn't that interesting? Look, as a class, we came up with ideas that reflect leadership. In what way? The industrial way. Why is that? Is that reflective of us as a society? Next, successful leader. Must he or she be charismatic? Maybe. Must he or she be understanding? Maybe. Must he or she be motivating? Maybe. Must he or she be independent? Also maybe. Must he or she be a problem solver? Also maybe. And must he or she be potential oriented? Maybe. As long as they do social justice, it doesn't matter. Thank you. That's about it.
Why don't more people embrace social change leadership model?
Why don't more people embrace the social change leadership model? I think if we mass bombarded the earth with pamphlets for everybody to see, to learn about the social change leadership model, that would be more attainable. However, I don't think it has enough spread just yet. However, York University, through the Student Community and Leadership Development Office, offers a certificate program. Career, job, certificates, good, yeah. Certificate program in the social change leadership model. There is a course at Glendon, a sociology course, in case any of you are staying here for a little bit, with a 35-hour placement, work placement, where you learn about the social change leadership model. And York essentially is big on that model, and lots of universities are picking up on that. So the ripple effect, the dandelion thing, people like myself sharing this to others, you get to learn about this model at a young age, relatively young. And then when the time comes for you to be in, from what I understand, you need to have as a position of leadership, you can now enact social justice. Does that answer your question?
Not really, but it's okay.
You want to
Just ask, you say the psychologically interesting question is why don't more people embrace that model? And your answer was it is because we don't have enough leaflets or books about it.
We don't have enough spread. Not enough people know
And
about it.
I'm just wondering myself, so if everybody would have a leaflet about it, would they endorse it? That's my question.
Well, it's 2014, and we as more or less liberal individuals still consider leadership to be that. I mean, that's reflected, no? I guess you're saying, yeah, that's the point, right? Yeah. Yeah.
I just have a question for you. You said leaders only essentially take part in social change. Would you say someone like Bill Gates, would you see him as a leader?
Bill Gates is a bad example, but I know what you mean. Why is it a bad example? Because he actually does enact social change, the Bill Gates Foundation.
Yeah.
I think what you're implying is somebody that's very successful at running an organization, at execution, right? Again, you have to ask the right questions. Does that person do it from a socially just perspective, or does that person do it to get the right numbers?
So Steve Jobs, maybe.
Yeah, even someone like Steve Jobs.
You're asking me as a filter through the social change model, do I consider Steve Jobs to be a leader? I don't know enough about him. Would I be able to sit down now? Professor, do you wanna pick a winner?